Hi, welcome to the What Drives You podcast. Today I'm joined by Paper Transport CEO Ben Schill, as well as Christina Depre, our Director of Logistics at PTI Logistics. Topics on the docket today. First and foremost, we're going to hit on the market and the sustainability of where we're at in this marketplace, and with everything going on. We're going to dive into what a shipper should be looking at as far as the health of the carrier, and finally a little wrap up with a close on an update on the logistics and rail market and some of the things we talked about in our previous episode. Hey, thank you both for joining today. Really excited to have our conversation. First topic, again, we've talked about this a lot, over the last couple of years because it's been a really important topic, and that's today's marketplace. So first question on the docket. Looking at the current landscape, can you talk through the kind of the rise of carriers and the fallout of carriers that we've seen through the last couple cycles?
Yeah, absolutely. So this market and really what we've seen over the last 3.5 years is something that we haven't seen in decades. I don't know that we've ever really seen it, but as long as I've been in this business, go back 25 years, I'll age myself, we have not seen this type of movement on the capacity side. And if you go back to really about July of 2020, when there was just a ton of freight moving, or hundreds of thousands of tons of freight moving, all these carriers started coming back into the market. And we saw a record number of registrations, new DOT numbers coming in, and just an enormous amount of capacity. And that was exacerbated by the supply chain issues. So although there was a ton of capacity, there still was everything was very tight because of all the supply chain issues that we were seeing, across the board. So we saw a record number come in a very short period of time. Right. And now we're really on the flip side of this. We are well into a depletion of capacity that really started October of 2022. Right. And we've never seen a history or a length this long of more carriers going out of the market than coming in. Okay. But we haven't felt it. Right. And you haven't felt it because there was that much excess capacity that entered really during the pandemic. Right. So, when I look at this in general, this is not a normal cycle. It's not a normal correction. We're on month 26, which is way too long for a normal correction. But this was really induced, during the pandemic and the fact that we have low barriers to entry and players can come and go. And, what typically the reason we haven't felt it is what typically happens is that capacity starts falling out of the market and you have some sort of macroeconomic, swing on the upside that exasperates things and suddenly things get tight really quickly. Right. And we just haven't reached that because we haven't seen the increase on the tonnage side. And, so as capacity's dropped out, freight has been, it hasn't been like a freight recession. When people say the freight recession, that's not true. It's really the capacity surplus. That's what this is about. So that's going to continue. The other unique thing that happened during this time is the same thing happened on the broker side. We had, going into COVID, there's 22,000 brokers. Mid-pandemic, there's 29,000 brokers. So everybody was jumping into this game. Now, we've seen a similar bleed off in terms of the number of brokers, like probably down to about that 22,000 number again, where we started. So it's just been an enormous kind of tidal wave on the capacity side with a little change on the demand side. Right.
I had heard with that influx of brokers, that just being such a massive increase on that side of the world too, that's helped to allow maybe some of the smaller capacity or smaller carriers to stick around a little longer because there's more connectability to shippers through the large surplus of brokers. And I mean, you think there's anything to that, or is that
I would absolutely say that, especially in this environment right now where a lot of shippers are actually utilizing their spot boards that individual carriers or an owner-operator may not have access to, but your larger brokers do. And so that is allowing them to get the freight to those smaller mom and pops where they may not have even had any type of access to that previously.
Right.
And that's happening because what you're seeing is your primary carriers are set and locked in at a specific rate point. But then after that, there's not really this push to go to a secondary or tertiary carrier that there may have been in the past because of where spot freight rates are right now.
Right.
And so it's actually beneficial for shippers at this point in time to go with their primary. But then we have seen this where shippers are actually saying, we're not going to go to our second or tertiary. We're going to go straight to our spot freight. And that's where a lot of these smaller carriers are seeing that freight, whereas in the past they wouldn't have had access to it at all.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say it's even bigger than the broker. So great points there in terms of kind of what we're seeing in the role that brokers play.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a couple other things. If you go back in history, the prevalence of freight factoring. So carriers getting their money the day they deliver or the day after they deliver is something that's commonplace today. So from a cash flow perspective, and that wasn't necessarily commonplace.
Right.
If you go back to 08, 09, those things didn't really exist to a great extent. So there's other pieces that don't change the fundamental economics, but it keeps carriers in business longer.
Yeah.
So that's one piece.
You've talked previously too about the different funding that was available during COVID for smaller carriers, especially, and how that has allowed some of these carriers to kind of pay off bad debt and continue on too.
Yeah, the carriers became very healthy, their balance sheets during COVID, as they benefited from some of the PPP programs that were in place. And so there's a number of pieces. The rise of power only, you have a lot of owner operators like attaching with larger carriers to move, so there's more consistent freight for them. So there's a host of things that have actually made life easier for the owner operator that has made this a prolonged kind of surplus of capacity.
Right. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So, alongside of that, are there actions that we can take as carriers or shippers can take in this market to improve, and kind of help spur along the correction, or are we just gonna have to ride this out and kind of see where it goes? What's your mindset around that?
So I think one of the biggest things for transportation companies is really to lobby at this point in time for the FMCSA to enforce some of the things that they have become a little bit more lax on.
Yeah.
Their own regulations, making sure that safety audits are actually getting conducted.
Right.
I mean, we onboard carriers that have unrated CSA scores at this point in time that haven't been checked, that have had their carrier authority for multiple years now.
Right.
So there is this significant backlog in that regard. So I think that's a huge push that we as a carrier community really need to push.
Right.
I would say the fundamental piece is there's too much capacity.
Yeah.
There's surplus of capacity. And our peers have never really been good about managing capacity to the level of freight, both directions. Right. And that's why you get such a cyclical piece. Everybody wants to grow. Everybody can grow and thinks that everybody else should shrink. So you get that mentality. And then what exasperates things is once rates get to this garbage level that they're at, they're unsustainable. Carriers are going out of business right now.
Right.
So what do? We don't reduce capacity. Everybody tries to run more and more miles at garbage rates, and it catches up with this industry. So you try to make it up in production, and it becomes just a snowball. So collectively, it's the product of a very fragmented market, but you have everybody operating independently, and nobody wants to take capacity out because they think everybody else will.
Right.
So.
Yeah. A perfect lead into the next question is, how are trucking companies truly operating? Like, what's the financial performance, for those that aren't maybe keeping up with all the publics or all the things that are happening with the industry? How are trucking companies actually doing? How are they performing right now on the asset side?
I would go out and say right now that more than 50% of trucking companies on the OTR market are upside down financially right now. They are not making it. Maybe they're getting by, Maybe they're not making truck payments, maybe they are, but there's no doubt when you look at the freight rates on the spot market. So if you're truly operating in the spot market, you are not making money. Those rates are at the same level as 2019, and operating costs are up nearly 30% since 2019. So there's no possible way that these small carriers are making money. Maybe they're positive cash flow from week to week or month to month, but eventually that party ends. So I don't think there's any secret, and you're starting to see the cracks. You're starting to see larger carriers go out of business right now. And maybe they don't even seem that large, but some of them that are 350 trucks now that are going out of business, went out of business last week, that carrier was 600 trucks not too long ago. So we're starting to really see the true cracks. But there's a lot to go through. So there's a lot of these carriers that are not, if you're not an extremely well-run carrier right now, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, a 20 truck sized company is in the top 7% of size. So I mean, when you say it doesn't seem like that, maybe a trucking company is a very big size, but I mean, if it's a 20 truck operation, that's actually a really big company in this industry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially as you start to look at the 100 truck, 200 truck, 300 truck. I mean, we think about some of the mega carriers and maybe, don't often enough thinking about those what we consider medium, but they're actually large for our industry. Like you've said many times before, 98% of this industry is made up of 1 to 5 truck operators, something in that ballpark, right? I mean, so really interesting. So that's a great segue into our kind of our second topic, and as we kind of think and shift to a shipper focus mindset, if you're lacking capacity, what are some things that you guys can think of that a shipper should be thinking about? A company's health as far as picking a carrier, selecting a carrier. What are some signs of unhealthiness, I guess, in that world when you're looking at carriers you're working with?
So when I look at someone, I want to make sure that their insurance is up to par. Absolutely. Are they carrying just that bare minimum amount of insurance, or do they have what really the cost of business and operations should have in order to cover themselves or to cover you as a customer? If you have a product that ends up, somehow being damaged, or all of the different things that can take place, at the end of the day, is your carrier insured properly to make sure that you don't end up taking a major burden of that cost? The second thing that I look at too is just trying to vet carriers is their age of fleet. That's one of those things. If they're not reinvesting in their own company at this point in time, do they really believe that they're going to be here for the long haul? And is that someone that I want to entrust with what we're moving?
Yeah, I think, and that's a great mindset, I think, on the age of fleet, especially, we've had multiple conversations historically about, being a sustainable entity, about the economic, but also environmental impact of operation. And so many of these smaller companies, or I should say, not smaller, but one and true operations, they have the pre-2010 type truck, right? And the trucks that are putting the most pollution out into the environment. And I think, so there's a dual effect there, right? There's a right fit and a service to the company, but also the impacts that some of those entities with older fleets and older operations are having, that we're being pushed on this industry to be better on. And we're kind of dragging along these old operations and older units that really we could probably do without.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not even just us as a company. Like, the shippers themselves all have environmental goals, and they have different sustainability metrics that they're trying to measure themselves on in today's world. And I don't know that every one of them is necessarily asking the question, what is your age of fleet? What is your plan to get there? And that's a very important question to be asking. Because it's not just you as a company, what you're doing as your impact, it's your tier 2 and your tier 3s.
Yep, we talked a lot about that the last time, so I think it's a great point. What other things, would you look at, Ben, when you're looking at a healthy carrier? What are the key things you're looking at, from the outside in, maybe from the carrier side that the shipper should be thinking of?
Yeah, I think it's age of fleet. I think it's the quality of the driver. You know, I mean, our drivers are putting themselves in front of our shippers every single day, and generally speaking, professional drivers want to work for professional companies. So if you see a quality decline, in terms of the driver, then you know that carrier's struggling to get the employees that they need in a time like this, which is a bad sign in terms of maybe not what they're paying, but what mileage they're getting, and maybe, you know, really struggling. So it becomes a spiral, I think, once you see a quality piece, and then certainly just the maintenance, you know, the vehicle maintenance scores on carriers tell the story of whether or not they're taking care of their equipment, regardless of the age, or are in a pain point. But, you know, I think what happens is, you know, everybody's going to capitalize, not everybody, a lot of people are capitalizing on the low rates that aren't sustainable. And you may not see these things until your carrier shuts down tomorrow. And that's what's happening. And a lot of these guys are guys and gals, they're dependent on one or two shippers. And if those one or two shippers continue to pinch those rates down, because that's what they can get on the broader market, there's probably not a lot of warning. They're not, when you're in a death spiral, you're not telling your customer that you're in this death spiral, I mean, look what happened to Yellow. I mean, they're forecasting this, and their customers, and it just accelerates things. So they're not going to be telling their shippers. It's just going to happen overnight. And that's what it's going to take to actually spring rates back into an acceptable level, because they're certainly not there right now.
Christina, you started with something, you know, alongside that, you know, the truck, but then also the insurance and the safety, that really hits home with me, you know, sitting in the seat that I sit here with our organization, that, you know, some things are hard to find, but there are a lot of things that are public information, you know, whether that's lawsuit filings, whether that's CSA scores, that certainly can be found. And I think that's a core focus, because if you're not focused on having a quality driver, proper driver training, you know, risk mitigation, accident reduction, speed control, you know, distraction limitation, those types of things can really have an impact all the way up through the channels. And we're seeing more and more of that, you know, the veil gets pierced, you know, between companies, into shippers, you know, into brokers, you know. So I think it's just something to really be aware of. Not easy to find sometimes, but I think something that definitely want to look at when you're looking at the overall health of an organization, you know, right alongside that turnover, which nobody likes to display publicly, and there's no public way for us to track that as an industry. It's something I'd love to see us improve upon. But if you're seeing a dedicated account, you know, new drivers coming on a regular basis, there's probably something going on there, right? So good. So I'm going to transition into the last topic, kind of a re-update from you, Christina. You want to just get a little bit of an update on the logistics, kind of, maybe not logistics, but the rail side of the world. What's going on there? You know, so maybe a general update, and then also, you know, where we talked a little bit about rail strikes and some pending concerns. You know, where's that at as well?
Yeah, I think the general rail community is a little bit interested to see what kind of shakes out now that the NS has its new board in place, and see what the next couple of months entail for that organization, and then how that'll play into the connecting rails associated to it. But as far as the Canadian rail update goes and the strikes there, CN came out yesterday with a new agreement. Now, there were a number of small changes to it, but the biggest one is related to the pay structure, going from an hourly offering back to that salary with a percentage increase for 2024 and 2025. So that was the biggest contention point. That, and then a secondary point of breaks in specific locations, and how often away from home individual operators were being told they needed to take a break away from home as opposed to at home. So those are two big points that changed. CPKC came out and said that they're going to actually be negotiating and presenting today a new offer as well. The labor minister up in Canada has been very vocal in trying to make sure that national security is maintained and keeping the railroads updated and moving to try and avoid this strike that has been previously stated would take place May 22nd. So right now, CPKC is openly saying that they don't believe that that's going to take place. But I mean, it is also in their best interest to say it's not going to happen.
Right, so, of course.
But again, I feel like, as we have seen, even if it gets closer and closer to that date, you're going to have shippers that are going to start to pull things away from the rail and go over the road those last couple of days beforehand, because no one wants their product to get stranded in the middle of nowhere on a track somewhere.
Right.
And so we will see if it isn't resolved before then. The next couple of days prior to that, people will start to pull things off of the rail and go OTR.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, kind of rail truckload mix. I mean, where's the market at? Anything you can add there?
I would say that shippers are still utilizing the lower spot rates on the OTR market. So we are seeing a smaller amount of conversion to rail. Now, some of the shippers that are truly dedicated to their environmental impacts are trying to double down in different ways. Some of them by utilizing alternative fuels for their intermodal dray, along with converting to intermodal, which is a phenomenal choice to make if you are really going for that sustainability goal. But outside of that, we're not seeing a lot of shift back to intermodal yet.
Okay.
I think once this carrier market starts to get back in line with what we've seen in previous years, we'll see that shift come back.
Makes sense. Thank you both again for joining today. And thank you for watching our episode of What Drives You. If you have a topic you'd like to see us to discuss further, please drop it in the comments below.